4 League Cups, 10 Charity Community Shields, 1 European Cup Winners' Cup, 1 European Super Cup, 2 Champions League titles. His manager ever, Sir Alex Ferguson.
You know, the staff I've got is Man United through and through, and he knows that we...
Out of bounds. That was the line nobody crossed with Sir Alex Ferguson. If you ever dared to step over it, your career at Manchester United was finished. Over 27 years at Old Trafford, Ferguson built an empire on one simple rule. His authority was absolute, no exceptions, no negotiations. Between 1995 and 2006, 5 world-class players made the fatal mistake of thinking they were bigger than their manager. Each one paid the ultimate price. These were not just fallouts. They were calculated executions, public humiliations, career-ending purges that sent a brutal message to every player in that dressing room. What really happens when a football legend decides he is bigger than the boss? Let me show you the 5 cases that defined Ferguson's iron rule and built his dynasty on the bodies of those who dared to disrespect him. Paul Ince was the first casualty, the foundational kill, the one that set the tone for 2 decades of absolute control. Ince was the engine of Ferguson's first great team, a star midfielder in the 1993 Premier League winning side. But his aggression on the pitch was matched by something far more dangerous. A rampant ego. Ince had given himself a nickname, the Governor. To Ferguson, that sounded like a declaration of war. The conflict exploded after a 3-1 victory over Norwich. Ince had played well. The team had won comfortably, but Ferguson was ballistic. He singled out Ince for one failed dribble in the 92nd minute. Ferguson screamed at him in front of the entire squad. "You are not Ryan Giggs or Andrei Kanchelskis. Your job is to pass the ball." Ince saw red. The red mist descended. He admits he committed the ultimate sin that day. He told Ferguson to go away. Actually, he told him something much worse. "I told him, boss, you can fuck off. I don't care. Fuck off. Do whatever you want. You complain, but we won." The dressing room froze. The 2 men went at each other. They almost came to blows. Assistant manager Brian Kidd and teammate Lee Sharp had to separate them before fists started flying. A 48-hour standoff followed. Ferguson and Ince refused to speak to one another. The silence was finally broken during a training ground head tennis match. Ferguson was acting as referee. At game point, he made a deliberately bad call against Ince's team. As Ince fumed on the court, Ferguson shouted across the pitch, "Incey, there's only one governor here, son." Ince started laughing. The standoff was over. Ferguson had made his point, but the disrespect became mutual. 3 years later, a Granada documentary captured Ferguson's pre-match team talk against Liverpool. Ferguson warned his players about Ince. "If he tries to bully you, he will fucking enjoy it. Don't ever let him bully you. He's a fucking big-time Charlie." That phrase stuck to Ince like a scar. The media ran with it. Ferguson regretted the comment years later, not because it was untrue, but because they had let a camera into the dressing room. Ince was sold to Inter Milan in 1995 for £7.5 million. Ferguson blamed his declining performances and arrogant attitude. Ince himself was devastated. He insisted the move was not his decision, but the decision was never his to make. The Ince purge was a masterstroke of political management. By selling his so-called governor in 1995, Ferguson cleared the way for the emerging class of '92. He promoted Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes into the midfield. It was a brutal move, a calculated message to the entire dressing room. No player, not even the governor, was bigger than the gaffer. If the Ince exit was a battle of egos, the expulsion of Jaap Stam was something colder, a swift execution for breaking the code of silence. Stam was the best defender in the world at the time, a cornerstone of the 1999 treble-winning team. His departure remains one of the greatest shocks of Ferguson's reign. The conflict stemmed from one unforgivable act. Stam published an autobiography called Head to Head while he was still an active player. This was a cardinal sin, a breaking of the sacred rule that protects the inner sanctum of the dressing room. The book contained several explosive revelations that enraged Ferguson. First, Stam alleged that Ferguson had illegally tapped him up. He detailed a secret meeting in an apartment arranged before PSV Eindhoven was informed, a clear breach of FA and UEFA regulations. Second, he claimed Ferguson actively encouraged his United players to dive. Don't try and stay on your feet if you're in the box and get a slight kick. Go down to win a penalty. Third, he made unflattering remarks about teammates. He famously called the Neville brothers busy cunts for their endless grumbling. Ferguson was reportedly enraged. Stam, who was on international duty, was completely shocked by the media backlash. He claimed the serialisation had misrepresented his book. He called Ferguson, who allegedly told him not to worry about it. Days later, Stam's United career was over. He was sold to Lazio for £16.5 million. The final discussion reportedly took place in the forecourt of a Manchester petrol station. Cold, ruthless, efficient. Stam maintained the book was a convenient excuse. Ferguson claimed Stam had lost a yard of pace. Crucially, this is the one purge Ferguson openly regretted. Without a question, I made a mistake there. His regret was justified. United's defence crumbled that season. They failed to win a trophy. Arsenal reclaimed the Premier League title. Stam's disrespect was not a direct challenge to authority like Ince's. It was a colossal error of judgment, a public airing of the club's dirty laundry. Ferguson's uniquely emotional and, by his own admission, incorrect footballing decision demonstrates that a breach of loyalty could be just as fatal as a breach of power. The boot that hit Beckham above the eye. That image defined the ultimate clash of football and celebrity. The most infamous dressing room incident in modern football history. Ferguson had a father-son relationship with Beckham, but that bond fractured as Beckham's fame escalated. Ferguson grew increasingly frustrated with what he saw as Beckham's mission to be known outside the game. In his autobiography, Ferguson wrote that Beckham was the only player he managed who chose to be famous. His 1999 marriage to Victoria Beckham was the turning point. Ferguson believed Beckham's work levels had dropped as his celebrity rose. Beckham later admitted he made wrong decisions that frustrated his manager. He recalled a specific incident where he flew to Ireland on a day off to see Victoria without informing Ferguson. When the manager saw him in the players' lounge at 6 a.m. before training, "He didn't talk to me. I knew I was in a little bit of trouble." The simmering tension exploded on February 15, 2003. After a 2-0 FA Cup defeat to Arsenal, Ferguson was enraged by a mistake from Beckham for one of the goals. He unleashed his hairdryer treatment in the dressing room. What happened next became legendary. Ferguson's autobiography reveals the truth. David swore. "I moved towards him, and as I approached, I kicked a boot. It hit him right above the eye. 'Sit down,' I said. 'You've let your team down.'" Teammate Diego Forlan recalled both men were getting ready to fight before Roy Keane and Van Nistelrooy stepped in to separate them. The result was a cut above Beckham's eye that required stitches. Months later, he was sold to Real Madrid. For Ferguson, the boot incident was merely the pretext for an execution he had already decided upon. The real conflict was Beckham's celebrity, which Ferguson viewed as a rival authority. The dressing room confrontation where Beckham rose to have a go at him provided the necessary justification. It allowed Ferguson to frame the sale not as a petty spat over celebrity, but as a necessary disciplinary action. Ferguson wrote that his authority was at stake. David thought he was bigger than Alex Ferguson. The minute a Manchester United player thought he was bigger than the manager, he had to go. That was the death knell for him. Of all the challenges to Ferguson's authority, none was more direct, volatile, or horrendous than the mutiny of his own captain, Roy Keane. The point of no return came in October 2005. Following a humiliating 4-1 defeat to Middlesbrough, the injured Keane was working as a pundit for the club's in-house television channel, MUTV. He recorded an explosive and candid interview. The piece was so incendiary that club officials, led by Chief Executive David Gill, refused to broadcast it. The tapes were allegedly burned. Leaked transcripts revealed why. Keane had not just criticised the team, he had individually and publicly torn apart his own teammates, questioning their professionalism, their talent, their courage. He said Rio Ferdinand thought he was a superstar just because he was paid $120,000 a week and played well for 20 minutes against Tottenham. He said he couldn't understand why people in Scotland rave about Darren Fletcher. He said Edwin van der Sar should have saved a 30-yard goal from Geisker Mendieta. He said John O'Shea was just strolling around when he should have been busting a gut to get back. He said Kieran Richardson was a lazy defender who deserved to get punished. He wasn't doing his job. He said Alan Smith was wandering around as if he was lost. He doesn't know what he is doing. He said young players think they have made it when they sign their contracts. They haven't. This was an act of mutiny. Keane had attempted to seize control of the dressing room narrative, a coup that Ferguson could not ignore. Ferguson's response was a masterstroke of political theatre. He gathered the entire first-team squad and coaching staff into a room. Gary Neville, who was present, described the scene as horrific. When Ferguson came down into the dressing room and said we needed to watch the video, Neville recalled thinking, "I just thought that's it." This trial by video forced the entire squad to watch their captain's betrayal. It predictably led to an explosive confrontation between Keane, Ferguson, and assistant manager Carlos Queiroz. Ferguson later described the meeting as horrendous. In his autobiography, he wrote of Keane's savage tongue, calling it the hardest part of his body. Describing that final argument, Ferguson wrote, "His eyes started to narrow, almost to wee black beads. It was frightening to watch." Keane had overstepped his mark. By forcing the squad to watch the video, Ferguson had forced them to choose a side. They chose the manager. Just 18 days after the Middlesbrough game, Keane's contract was terminated by mutual consent. Ferguson had successfully crushed the most dangerous internal rebellion of his career. Not even his most decorated captain was indispensable. The final great purge was that of Ruud van Nistelrooy, a prolific striker who scored 150 goals for the club. His exit was a classic example of Ferguson using a disciplinary issue to justify a cold-blooded strategic footballing decision. Van Nistelrooy's relationship with Ferguson disintegrated for two primary reasons. The first was the emergence of a new generation, led by Cristiano Ronaldo and Wayne Rooney. Van Nistelrooy, a pure poacher, was used to David Beckham putting crosses into the box. He grew openly frustrated with the young flamboyant Ronaldo, who would chop back rather than cross. This led to training ground arguments, including one where Van Nistelrooy allegedly kicked Ronaldo, forcing Rio Ferdinand to intervene. The second catalyst was the 2006 League Cup final. Ferguson, rewarding Louis Saha for his form in the competition, benched Van Nistelrooy for the match against Wigan. This benching was the final flashpoint. According to Rio Ferdinand, Ferguson had promised Van Nistelrooy he would come on as a substitute, but then used all three subs on other players. Van Nistelrooy went nuts. Ferdinand recalled him going crazy on the bench, screaming, swearing at the manager. He was seen leaving the stadium early while his teammates celebrated. He pocketed his winner's medal in disgust. Ferguson later stated, this fractious reaction was the main factor in his decision to sell. Van Nistelrooy was sold to Real Madrid that summer. In truth, the outburst was merely the justification. The real issue was footballing. Ferguson had to make a decision between his 30-year-old goalscorer and the future of his club, Ronaldo and Rooney. As Rooney himself put it, one of them had to give, and I think Alex Ferguson made the right decision. Van Nistelrooy's screaming and swearing gave Ferguson the disciplinary cover he needed to remove a 150-goal legend without it appearing as a simple, cold-blooded tactical decision. In a unique twist, this conflict was formally resolved. In 2011, Van Nistelrooy sent Ferguson a text and called to apologise. Ferguson accepted it directly. The two ended the rift. The careers of these 5 world-class players at Manchester United all ended with the same death knell. Each man in his own way was perceived by Sir Alex Ferguson to have thought he was bigger than the manager. For each, the result was a calculated purge. These 5 conflicts were not failures of management, they were the very foundations of it. Each high-profile exit was a brutal message sent to the rest of the dressing room, establishing and reinforcing the total authority from which Ferguson's success was built. Ince, in 1995, established the hierarchy by proving the governor was disposable. Stam in 2001 showed that breaking the code of silence was fatal. Beckham in 2003 proved no celebrity could rival the manager's authority. Keane in 2005 crushed an internal mutiny. Van Nistelrooy in 2006 demonstrated ruthlessness in managing generational change. Which of these players do you think crossed the line the most? Drop your pick in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you love deep football stories like this. Ultimately, disrespect is the key to understanding Ferguson's dominance. His brutality was not a character flaw. It was a management tool. By winning these 5 wars, he ensured he rarely had to fight another. Ferguson's control created an era no manager has matched. These purges built his empire. Every time a player thought they were out of bounds, Ferguson reminded them who held the power. That was his genius. That was his legacy. If you respect how Ferguson handled egos, hit subscribe, because we have even more stories about the managers who ruled football like kings.